All right, happy Friday, everybody, and welcome to another future-focused weekly Q&A. I'm looking forward to it, and happy Halloween. I think it's Halloween. Yeah, it is. I did actually, well, of course it is. I actually did kind of try and theme some of these things around the holiday theme, but I'm not going to pull the analogy too far with it. So anyway, if you are not familiar with this, I'm Christopher Lind, and Future Focused is kind of a podcast and Q&A that I run to answer some of the biggest questions around what's happening at the intersection of business, tech, and people. So I'm going to talk about three different things, but specifically I've got three questions related to each of these topics. But before we get into it, if you enjoy this content, please like, subscribe, follow, all that good stuff. Since this is my live Q&A, I do have questions pulled from my community and stuff like that. But if you have questions, you can engage and interact with me as well on here, and I will take questions live along the way. Now, the three topics my questions circle around are, one, this whole AI bubble discussion around, is it a bubble? Is it not a bubble? Is it going to pop? Is it not going to pop? What's going to happen with it? All this other stuff. And this one is actually going to carry forward into next week's podcast because I'm going to go deeper on it. And then I also have an article that I'm in the process of working on next week on Substack that goes deeper on that one. So this one's kind of the bigger one. But then I'm also going to talk about the Walking Dead workforce with all the noise around layoffs. There have been a ton of layoffs at Amazon. Target just released some. Meta got rid of a lot of their super intelligence folks. And there's a lot of hype around, is this AI? Is it not AI? What is the impact? So I've got three questions with that one. And then the other one was a statement that caught me off guard this week by the CEO of Waymo, which is, he said that society is ready for people to get killed by a Robotaxi. A little bit of a jarring statement to make, but I want to answer some questions about it because I've had some people recently ask me some things. So I've got three for each, but if you have questions along the way, feel free to ask them and I will bring those in. So with that, let's talk about the AI bubble first. If you haven't heard this, I don't know where you're living, but everybody is asking questions around the state of AI. Is the economic growth, air quotes, we're seeing with it sustainable? I've heard things as much as the bubble it's creating is 4 times the size of any bubble we've ever had before. People want to know, is it going to pop? All these other things. I don't necessarily know if it's the right question to be asking, but we can talk about it. So the first question that I gathered from the community related to this is the AI boom finally hitting reality, or are we just in the early, messy middle of the real payoff? And so I know the person who asked this, and their question was kind of like, is it like hit its peak yet? Or are we starting to see, the messy middle of this whole thing? I think it's a yes and kind of question, in terms of whether we're at the peak of it. I think the problem is that there's a lot of missing information around this. The bubble we're seeing largely isn't real. So I think there's still some growth, air quotes, that we're going to see as these big 7, the big 5 or the big 7, continue to grow as they're focused on infrastructure. And they happen to be, the ones that are focused on the chips and the actual AI tech that's actually fueling a lot of this stuff. So I think we aren't at the point yet where we're going to see them stop growing. And we aren't at the point where we're going to see all these little startups popping off left and right. But I think the part that we have to be careful of is that boom, the AI boom everybody keeps talking about, isn't necessarily translating into boom economically elsewhere. And that's obvious if you look at layoffs, if you look at employment, if you look at some of these other things. And if you talk to really a lot of other businesses that aren't in the AI world, they're not exploding in the same way. Now, there are some that are seeing that, but it's not the same. And so there's a little bit of like smoke and mirrors around the fact that we're in this economic boom because the AI industry is giving the impression of it. And I think that's something we got to be really, really careful of, is that I think there's a lot of things that are actually struggling right now. And what I would say is, I think things are probably, if I were to predict, I actually think things are going to get worse before they're going to get better. Because in the consulting work I do, there are still a lot of companies, not AI companies, who are trying to operate off this FOMO that they need to get in on it, because if they don't quick get in on it, they're missing out. And it's like, you're not missing out on anything. A lot of this stuff is noise. The infrastructure companies are shelling money over to AI startups, and then those AI startups are shelling money back to the infrastructure companies to pay for the compute and tokens that they're doing. And so you're like, there's not this growth that we're necessarily seeing. And you talk to people, you talk to leaders who are running other businesses, and they're not seeing the same kind of growth. So I think the boom is not really the boom that a lot of people think it is. And then on top of it, I think it is going to leak, I guess would be the best way to say it. And that there are companies, and I warn companies about this pretty frequently. You got to be really careful about how dependent you're becoming on some of these AI platforms, in that they might not be here in a year, because I've seen these tech booms before, and things start up and then they literally vaporize. Either they get acquired or they just completely crash. And so if you've built a ton of your infrastructure on these platforms, when they vanish or get acquired, and of course the second a tech company gets acquired by a bigger company, not all the time, but a lot of times, they just kind of slowly die off or get absorbed, I guess would, some would frame it that way. But it's a very vulnerable time to be building your regular company, your non-AI startup, on this kind of stuff. And yeah, so I think this is another one. You can't see it if you're on Substack, but if you're on YouTube and LinkedIn, you can see this. I mean, this is kind of the crazy part, is these data centers are being popped up all over the world, which again gives some of this impression there's this growth because we're standing up data centers and we're doing all this stuff. But those data centers require very few people after they're built. They're a complete kind of drain on the economic system in the area. So I think you just got to be really careful about how you're thinking about it. And normally people are like, well, what do we do? And usually one of the things is like, now is a good time to go back to the fundamentals. If you're running a certain kind of bit, and it doesn't mean be tech resistant. That's the one thing that I try and make sure people understand is I'm not saying avoid tech, go back to the good old days, like, be Amish. Like I guess you could, but that's not what I mean by like avoid using all this tech because it's going to blow up. Not necessarily. You got to be wise with it, and you do still have to adapt because business and work is changing. But what I continue seeing is people are losing sight of the foundations, the fundamentals of what makes an organization successful, what makes leaders successful, and they're kind of offloading it onto AI or tech, thinking like somehow you can sprinkle AI magic on things and it'll be fixed, and it just doesn't work that way. So, a lot of the work I do, I end up going back and we start remapping like, well, let's talk about what makes your business successful pre-AI. Like, did you ever even define that or lay that out? If you didn't, like, let's figure that out. And then let's reevaluate these processes instead of just going, hey, cool, we got this new startup platform that promises these agents can do it. Because not this next week, but the week after, there's some pretty staggering research that was just released. I haven't looked into it yet. I need to do a little bit more digging, which is why I'm not going to talk about it yet this week. But there's some pretty staggering research. I did take a first glance at it, at just how effective these AI agents are at replacing human laborers. And let's just say at first glance, it's not great. So a lot of these companies that are handing over human labor to AI agents going, we're good now. They're in for a world of hurt if they're not careful. Okay, so number two, and so yeah, the other piece, and I do agree with this, that a lot of these a lot of these data center things, like the economic and environmental effect of them is pretty rough. So if you're in a local area and they're talking about building a data center, I know people get excited about it because like, oh, all this revenue that's going to come hit us and it's going to be great for the community. I'm not into politics, but if there's ever a time to get involved in your local politics and maybe go to a town hall or something and share your thoughts, if they're planning on putting a data center in your backyard, it might be a good time to do that. Okay. Number 2. So one of the questions that came through was, why does every innovation cycle seem to swing between the extremes of it's going to change the world and worthless? And and their question was, what does that actually say about us as people? I mean, one thing I think I would say about us as people, just in general, and I would say this about myself, is we're really bad at learning from our mistakes. In general, we don't learn from history. Solomon in Ecclesiastes famously says there's nothing new under the sun. Like, all we do is just continue going through the same cycles. And there's a lot of truth in that. Now, we could sit and argue all day long about why I, coming from, where my worldview is, have a particular view on what that is. But I think, it's not, I think that's actually one of the problems is, right now, we tend to get so caught up in fighting about who's at fault. Well, why didn't you see this? Well, it's actually those people's problem. They're the ones that started it. They're the ones that need to fix it. And we end up in this cycle of, we're just like arguing with each other about who's responsible instead of going, how about we all just work on figuring this out? And so in terms of the question, I'm actually going to redirect it rather than, well, what does it say about us other than we aren't great at learning from our mistakes. But I actually don't know that it's either world changing or worthless. And I think that's one of the misnomers about this AI hype conversation right now is everybody's trying to figure out, like, is this a bubble that's going to explode and leave everybody behind? Or is this just going to keep growing and change the world? And eventually we're going to all live off of universal basic compute and, not have to work, or the robots are going to, I don't know if anybody else saw that humanoid robot now that you can buy that actually isn't ready for prime time, but you can, for 20 grand, you can have a robot come into your house and it can answer the door and wash your dishes. But there's, some downsides, as though just a small one, that it's probably being remotely controlled through its cameras by who knows what. But anyway, but I think my point is with this, it's not necessarily world-changing or worthless. And I think that's what we're going to see with the AI, whatever you want to call it, boom, bubble, hype cycle, whatever, is it's not like it's this fake bubble filled with hot air. I mean, it is in some ways filled with a lot of hot air, but when it pops or leaks or whatever it ends up doing, as this thing is growing, it's changing the game board and the rules of the game and the pieces. So even after whatever we go through, and I think we've still got some time before we really see things start to go, because going back to the original question, we have to get hurt really bad before we seem to recognize this is a mistake. And so I think, when I look at some of this stuff, it's actually already changing how things happen. It's changing the way people do work. It's changing the way businesses run. It's changing all this other stuff. So even if, let's say, AI blew up, we're not going to go back to pre-AI days. And I know there's some people who are really holding on to that hope that, like, maybe all the big AI companies will just collapse and, we won't have to worry about AI anymore. And there's just too much money. There's too much investment. There's too much advancement in the tech, and it's so far integrated into everything that we can't really undo it. It's not feasible. It's not possible. So I think that's where it comes back to, okay, so then how do we make sure we don't atrophy the wrong muscles? How do we make sure we know where it is? How do we make sure we're not becoming too overdependent? And I don't know about anybody else, but the other week, AWS went down, and it threw me for a loop. Like, it actually forced me to take inventory of some of the work I do and actually go, wait, where is AI actually injected in my systems? And that was reinforced because I was interviewed for an article and they said, what tools do you use? And I actually had to think about it because some of them are so ingrained, I don't even really think about it where and when I use them, type of a thing. So I kept going back to them afterwards. Like, actually, now that I think about it, I use Notebook LM for this, or I use Descript for this type of a thing. So anyway, but that's what I think. That's why I think it's important to pay attention right now and be actively thinking about this stuff, not just letting this stuff, take over or just go with the flow. I think going with the flow right now is a rather dangerous move to make. Well, and then got one of the comments. Grok is for Substack, you can't see this. Grok AI tried to convince me to rob a bank, sell my house, and start a new civilization in the jungle. Well, hopefully you didn't take its advice, but in some ways, I guess, given where things are right now, I could see why AI might encourage somebody to do that, but that doesn't make it good advice. Make it good advice. Okay, third and final question related to this one. If the AI bubble bursts, who actually gets hurt? Investors, companies, everyday people trying to use it well. The reality is when this stuff starts to level off, everybody is going to be affected by it. So let's kind of reframe it in that everybody will be affected by it, but it won't be equal. And I think that's the part that's really, really unfortunate. And all you have to look at is even where things are. If you're in the US, like look at the government shutdown right now and look at, who gets hurt. Well, I mean, everybody gets affected by things, but some people are affected worse than others. And I think the really unfortunate part is it's always the vulnerable who get hurt the worst. And that's what really bothers me with this whole AI movement is that, as these companies who seem to be raking money in hand over fist. I mean, Amazon tagged in at like 59 billion in revenue this year so far, and they're laying off tens of thousands of people. And we'll talk about that one, but it's one of those things where it's like, okay, at some point we got to recognize if we don't take care of people, there's not going to be people left to buy things, to run things, to keep things moving. And all you have to do, again, is spend some time looking at human history and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. This whole thing isn't new. So if the AI bubble bursts, yeah, there's a lot of people who are going to be affected. There's a lot of people who are going to get really hurt by it. They already are right now as companies are making reckless decisions, laying people off over AI, chasing after money. The other thing with it is they're pouring. This is one of the things a lot of people don't understand is companies are pouring tons of money into AI infrastructure and AI technology. So it's not really free like it seems. It looks like, oh, we're just bringing all this tech in and we're just getting these infinite gains, but it's not. And the part that I say I don't think we're over the hump yet is companies are just now starting to realize the damage AI does left unchecked. I can't count how many more people reach out to me now about AI gone wrong and they need help cleaning up the mess and figuring out like, oops, like this went nowhere near the way we thought. What do we do now? And unfortunately, they've gotten rid of a lot of the people who knew how it worked before. They've lost a lot of their intellectual capital. They didn't really have anything documented. And then they fed all this stuff into a machine without really knowing what the black box was doing. And so even when it breaks, why it broke or where it broke or what broke isn't always super clear. And if you look at any of the safety research around this, AI has a really bad habit of not being honest and truthful in what goes wrong. And so even when you say what happened and it tells you, it's not necessarily telling you the truth. And some of that is, the nature of just the way the technology is built. But I think that's the thing that everybody just needs to be aware of. So I think with this one, it's like, watch out for each other. And right now we need to take care of each other because there are people who are going to get hurt. They're getting hurt now. And we can be doing more to help each other with that. Okay, so let's transition to topic 2, which has to do with this what I what I jokingly, not so jokingly, called The Walking Dead. So hang on before I answer this one, because the question came in. So the channel that I have right here. So the question came in: what is your channel for? Like, what am I arguing for? I really focus on continuing to help people think critically about where we're going with what's happening at the intersection of business, tech, and people. So you can look at my other stuff and you'll see I'm talking about what's going on with AI, what's happening in the business world, what's happening, and how does that affect people, and how do we do a better job with that. Okay, so related to that, let's talk about the Walking Dead workforce, because that's what it feels like when I talk to people right now, even ones who are employed. That is very much the feeling that a lot of people have right now. Is they're alive, they're still surviving in their company, but they're a little bit of the Walking Dead, just waiting for something to happen, waiting for their company to make some announcement, waiting for their department to get wiped out, waiting for something chaotic to happen. And the tragic part is, they're not wrong. And I don't say that to freak people out or, send panic, but I'm in a fair amount of these executive meetings where a lot of companies are re-examining their workforce, and they are making decisions around, do we really need this many people? Should we be thinking about automating jobs? These other kinds of things. And unfortunately, a lot of these decisions are being made by people who don't really understand the work and are kind of in a hurry or are sucked into this hype cycle, believing some of these promises. So this kind of sense that I'm on shaky ground is reasonable. So, to the folks who think, nah, my job is perfectly safe, I've got nothing to worry about, my company would never, I would at least caution you to be a little more alert than that, because the last thing you need to do is have the rug pulled out from under you. And it's the first time you've thought about, what would I do if I got a 30-minute meeting with HR put on my calendar and they said, hey, unfortunately, we're, eliminating your position, type of a thing. And so I would encourage people to at least operate with that level of awareness on this. I will get to your question. That's a long, so I'll take a look at that one after this first one. So let me answer this one, and then I'll come to the one in the comments. So is AI really taking jobs, or are companies using it as an excuse for mistakes they already made? Yes. And yes, and more, in that I don't like, and actually, I truly don't understand why some of these companies are leaning on, we're laying off people for AI. It's a gross oversimplification for what they're doing. And it sounds convenient. Like, hey, we can just blame AI and we'll be fine. It's actually a really not wise move to make right now. Not only because publicly it looks really bad, but you send a message through your whole workforce, given the fact more and more people are recognizing AI is not living up to its promises. It calls into question you as a whole company when you're like, wait, you're laying off all your people for AI? Like, do you not? So it's not a good move. It erodes trust. It tells even the workers who are left behind where it's only a matter of time till we come for you. Like, there are so many reasons why. And the reality is, there are instances where it truly is just an AI is wiping out jobs, but at least my experience, the companies I work with, it's never quite that simplistic. It's never quite, we implemented, Copilot, and now that we have agents, we're going to wipe this out. Or we bought this new platform and now we need this many less. Now, there are certain instances where I've seen that happen, but it's rarely that. Again, a lot of times AI is a scapegoat. It's convenient. Companies may be overhired. You're seeing this a lot in tech companies, where during the boom of COVID and kind of this digital space, they could spend as much money as they wanted. They could do whatever they wanted. And so they just sucked up people like a Hoover. And now they're recognizing, like, okay, this is actually more expensive than we thought to build the tech we use. It's not quite delivering what we thought. And they don't want to admit they made a mistake or they overbought. So it's easier to just go, oh, look at us. No, we didn't make a mistake before. We're just so innovative now. We've figured out how to use AI. And so we're eliminating jobs as if that's a positive thing. So there is some things where, yes, AI is being embedded in workforces. It is, in some cases, taking out large parts of an organization or drastically reducing it. And those bad decisions are happening. And I will go on record saying they're bad decisions. To anybody, if you're just literally going, AI is going to do this instead of people, you're going to feel the pain of that really hard at some point. And it doesn't matter how simple you think the work is or whatever. I mean, look at all these big companies that McDonald's, Taco Bell, they thought, we'll just have AI take orders. And both of them walked away from it, which you would think on the surface, taking somebody's food order at a drive-through would be the easiest thing you could have AI do. And the reality is no work is ever that simple. So it is taking jobs in that there are heavy investments in AI. So companies are having to rebalance where that money is coming from, which a lot of times companies just assume people will pick up more work and they can just wipe out work. It is changing the way work is done. And some people are unwilling to adapt their skills. And that's just a reality of leadership. And that's not limited to AI. There's many times when I was in corporate workforce where I had people on my teams that they did not want to adapt or change. And sometimes that leads to, hey, you either need to get on board with this or you're going to need to do something else. So sometimes it is for legitimate reasons. But I think we're in this stage where getting to the root of it. And even Amazon came out and said, well, I know we kind of at first implied it was AI that got rid of all these jobs. Actually, it was culture. Then they banked on culture, which to me is yet another really crappy excuse, because basically you're saying like these people didn't fit what? Which we're in this yes person culture now anyway, where if you don't just blindly agree with the people in charge, it's like what's that movie? Oh, Alice in Wonderland, off with their head. And so it's a little misleading. So is AI taking jobs? Sort of, but whenever you see something like Amazon eliminated blah, blah, blah jobs because of AI or all this, I actually would encourage you to take a deep breath and just know that it's not that simple. And no company, well, I won't say no company. Most companies are not literally just wiping out tons of workers for an agent the way the media is representing it. I'll put it that way. AI is affecting jobs. To your question here, what is the possibility of future AI? Will it create more jobs or replace jobs? It really depends on who you talk to. And I think there's very legitimate reasons on both sides to argue for this. It's not creating jobs the same way that I think people promised. Even like, let's take the data center example. People are like, oh, we're going to build all this AI infrastructure and it's going to create so much economic growth. And then you go look wherever one of these massive data centers gets built. It sounds cool. And that's where some of these cities and towns are getting completely raked over the coals, because it's like, wow, Google, Meta, Amazon, they're going to come put a big data center here. We're going to have all this economic growth from one of these big dogs putting their company in our town. And then it's like, oh, wait. This is largely an unmonitored energy magnet that's just sucking up everything and sucking up our natural resources next to us and like annoying the crap out of everybody with the hum of this thing. And so it's not creating jobs like it's being promised. And I think that's really unfortunate because it is misleading a lot of people. Is it creating new jobs? In some ways, yes, but even that I think is a little misleading, because even if I look at my work now, a lot of my work in AI, transformation, yes. But even I would say that's only because AI is what a lot of companies are focused right now on. My work is really more in business transformation, which could be AI. I also do digital infrastructure. A lot of times I do talent transformation, where I'm actually re-looking at the skills of people. I'm looking at the org structures. I'm looking at the way things are set up with humans. So I'm doing business transformation work. AI just helps. So did AI create my job? Not really. It just changed the nature of the work I'm working on. And I would say that's more what I'm seeing is jobs are changing. Things are changing. It wasn't that long ago where everybody was like, there's going to be a whole industry of prompt engineers. Remember that? Does anybody else remember that? When it was like, oh, go back to school for prompt engineering, because that's going to be a huge job of the future. And it's like, really? Do you know any directors of Googling? It's the same thing. It's like, no, people just know they have to search. Nobody became the director of search Googling, at their company. Everybody had to learn how to do it. And the same thing is happening with AI, where it's like everybody's having to learn how to interact with AI and use AI to get better, which is why, if you go to my website, like why I focus so much on AI effectiveness, because it's about actually recognizing people need to know how to use AI effectively, not just use AI. Because, it can be effective, it can be not effective, depending on what you end up doing. So anyway, will it create new jobs? Of course it will. There's new industries. I mean, there's a whole industry being set up of cleaning up AI messes. But I would argue that's not necessarily new jobs. It's just shifting. And actually, one of the analogies I use a lot is AI doesn't create anything. It just transfers it. So it gives the appearance it's creating. It's the very nature of it. GPT, generative pre-trained transformer. But it's not necessarily creating, it's transferring. Just like I talk to my kids about all the time. I'm like, it's like the law of conservation of energy. You never create energy, you simply transfer it from one state to another. It moves around. And I think the same is true with AI. So this promise that there's going to be these infinite jobs of the future, I'm like, no, it's going to change the jobs we have. It's going to change the way work gets done. Might there be some new things as other ones go away? Yes, but it's not. And I would actually say some of the efficiency gains, probably net, are going to reduce things, but not nearly as much as companies are banking on. Again, AI does not just replace people in this 1-to-1 ratio like is promised. Yeah, Luisa, I actually got a kick out of it. Because I did a lot of work with McDonald's. I've done a lot of work with McDonald's in the past, and I spent some time in their innovation center. And I don't think people realize how much work and energy goes into drive-through operations at like McDonald's. And it's true in other companies too, but it's just what I can continually see happening is that everybody thinks work is super simple when it's someone else's work. Oh, AI can totally do that job. AI can totally do this job. And then you go do that job, or you talk to somebody who does that job, and you very quickly realize like, oh, snap, this is not as easy as I thought. And there's complexity to this that I had not considered. So I think that's one of the things that we're really seeing, which is why is AI taking jobs? I would just say it's moving things around would be the best way to do it. I did say I'll come back to this one. So I actually agree with your point here that yes, it's really about defining the outcome you're trying to get first when it comes to AI systems or AI things, And I would actually say it's not only about the outcome you're going to. I think that's important. I think sometimes what also gets missed is people skip over how is it happening today and why is it happening the way it's happening today. I've done a lot of business transformation work over the years, and one of the things that's often missed, and you see this all the time when like a new leader comes in, this is a big part of the problem with turnover, is you get a new leader that comes in and they go, well, how we do things is stupid. I've always done it this way, so I'm going to blow it up. And either they realize they can't do that and they waste a bunch of time, or they get into it and realize, whoa, some of these things that looked silly to me actually were done on purpose, or a certain, player was involved, or, the way our business operates, I can't quite move things the way I thought. And so I do think, yes, you need to know what you're trying to do, but you also need to know how it's done today and why, so that you can surgically map what's the gap between those two things, and what risks do I need to watch out for? How do I do that? And that's a lot of the really hard work that nobody seems to want to do. Everybody's like, well, yeah, but isn't the point of Gen AI so we can skip over that? It's like, no, actually, that's the biggest mistake you can make, is trying to skip that step, thinking that AI somehow is going to pick up the pieces. It won't. In fact, it'll make a much bigger mess of whatever it touches. So you got to be careful there. Okay. What happens? This was a good question because it's related to the layoffs. What happens to trust inside a company when leaders talk about efficiency, but people just see layoffs? Really bad things. And this, to me, I talked about it, I think 2 weeks ago on Substack, where trust is a currency that has really, really significant value. And companies don't always take that trust as seriously as they should. They underestimate how valuable it is. They underestimate, the impact when it breaks or when something's missing. And so when companies use this corporate lingo, and I see it all the time, I was really, really hard on Accenture recently because they used the term unreskillable. And I'm like, you just strike that word from your vocabulary. That's like a scarlet letter you stamp on people, and it's not okay to do it. But you see this in organizations where they're like, well, we're focusing on efficiency. And then all people see is, hey, we just laid 14,000 corporate workers off of. And so they immediately hear things like efficiency and associate it with layoffs, which it shouldn't be. You should, as a company, be focusing on efficiency. And as an employee, you should be looking at becoming more efficient with what you do. It should be a good thing. But what happens is when you start attributing these good words with really bad things, you actually almost change the way people define good in your organization. And that has really long-term effects on performance. When people start hearing efficiency means layoffs, you actually disincentivize efficiency. People go, well, I don't want us to be more efficient because that means they're going to cut us. They're going to get rid of people. So now, even when people see opportunities for efficiency, they're either not going to take them, or they're going to take them and not say anything, which causes bigger problems because then you don't really know how work is getting done and you start asking questions nobody wants to tell you. Or worse, I guess I don't know if it's worse, but it's equally bad, at least. People start building bloat into their processes and into their organizations. And I see this all the time when it comes to the budgeting cycles, where you're in an organization, and I've been there myself, where you've got these huge budgets and you intentionally make asks way over what you're going to do because you're going to get told no, and they're going to cut it down to this, and they're going to continue to whittle it down later on. And it's all part of this corporate game to make things happen. That consumes time. It consumes waste. I mean, like it's really bad. And so when you just start to associate really good things like efficiency, operational excellence, performance, upskilling, when you start associating those things with really negative things and you aren't honest about what you're doing and transparent about some of the mistakes you're making or how you're going about it. And the reality is, a lot of times the reason people jump to some of this language is they didn't actually do the hard work. And so it's easier to say those things like Accenture. Oh, we got rid of all these people because they were unreskillable. Really? They were unreskillable? As in you did everything you could and they were completely incapable of developing skills related to AI. Permanently? Like, saying somebody's unreskillable is a permanent status you're assigning to somebody, and you're saying they are incapable of developing the skills that are required in the future. Give me a break. You can't do that. But when you associate those two things, it becomes really, really bad. Okay, so Louisa, there's an alignment to self-driving technology, a lot of unpredictability. Yeah. I think we still are seeing, and that's why, going back to my first topic of like the AI bubble, is it going to burst or not burst? We're still in the infancy stages of what AI is. And I know everybody's like, oh, doomsday is right around the corner. I mean, maybe, but if it is, it's only because we make really stupid decisions and we hand a bunch of stuff over to autonomous systems
without, without thinking. I mean, I know we're talking now about getting back into nuclear testing. So, yeah, sure. If we decide to hand over AI the ability to decide when and how that gets done, I mean, I guess we could really cause some problems, but I think we're still very much in the infancy stage of things. Okay, question number 6. Are we in danger of becoming a walking dead workforce, employed but disengaged and dehumanized by AI? Absolutely. I think this is one of the greatest risks I see happening in organizations and just in general with people right now, because they aren't super motivated. They're not really clear on what they should even be doing. They feel like they're just waiting for the other shoe to drop. So they're showing up, lights are on, nobody's home. And I don't mean that in like a negative way to the workforce. I just mean it's like that's what happens when you just become disengaged and you start questioning your own skills and value. You're hearing people being called unreskillable and they're being easily replaced by autonomous systems. And so people start going like, what's even the point of being here other than just to collect a paycheck? And I know that a lot of companies then go, well, we need to, force that kind of thinking out of it. That's not the way it works. You don't get people to be engaged by yelling and screaming at them or threatening them with their jobs. If anything, you're going to compound that problem. And I think that's one of the things that's a big risk right now, which to the question of, is this a risk right now? Absolutely. And if anybody in here is in a job right now, there's probably a good chance you might be feeling some of this where you're going into work and you're going, I'm not even sure what I'm doing or where we're going or how my contributions are adding to everything. I feel like I'm just waiting for the next announcement of layoffs and I'm going to get wiped out. And so it's really easy to get disengaged. And I get it. I've been there myself. It's not fun when you're feeling that way. What I would say as encouragement, not as well, maybe as encouragement, but something that I would actually encourage people to do. And I always did this with my teams when I led, was I would always push my teams to be like, what you do. Yes, Luis, I'll answer that one. What you do should not be 100% tied to your job. That makes you extremely vulnerable. And so I have always worked with my teams to say, you should be actively doing professional things outside of this job. Now, I'm always clear, like, look, if you're not getting your work done, that we're going to have a performance conversation. But I would actually encourage my teams. I'm like, you should be actively, if you want to do some advising, if you want to do some public speaking, if you want to do, build a course and do something like that, like you should. If you want to start a podcast, because I do so much content creation, I would work with my teams on like, hey, what tools do you use? Or how do you start a YouTube channel? Or, how do you create a podcast? And it's because what it does is it actually gives you something that's a little bit more in your control to work on and to focus your attention. And not that you should make your whole life about work. That's not what I'm saying. In fact, growing up in a funeral home, I would actually argue against that. But you should have other areas of focus. And what I have found consistently, because I will say, when I bring this up with senior leaders, a lot of times, not all the time, but a lot of times they freak out about it. And this was always one of the big challenges when you would implement, learning system, like in LinkedIn Learning, you'd get these leaders that are like, I don't want anybody taking a course that's not directly related to their job. I don't want them wasting time on that. And I'm like, that's not a waste of time. People growing and developing, building skills that seem intersectional to what they're doing is not a waste of time. It not only engages them, but it actually helps them to perform better. They pick up these other skills. They are more resilient in the ups and downs of things because they don't feel like they're completely dependent. And inevitably in work, there's inefficiency, there's downtime, there's times that things aren't moving at the same rate. And so when people are engaged in other things, instead of them sitting around being bored or disengaged, they are engaged in some of this other stuff. And I even personally, I've always had my content and stuff on the side, I guess you could say, but it made me better. It kept me connecting with other business leaders. It helped me know what was going on in the industry. It helped me be smarter about decisions and have a network of people I could bounce things off of. That's actually a really valuable skill to an organization. So when organizations disincentivize employees to having a life outside of the company, I'm actually like, you're actually hurting yourself. and again, the whole paranoia is, well, what if they might leave, or what if they spend too much time on it? Well, then first of all, one, you don't own employees, so they're not yours. So if they leave, they leave. That should be a sign of growth. You develop them to the point they can move on. You get somebody else, and if you do it right, they'll probably help you figure it out because they had such a great experience. That's always been my experience. So you shouldn't be afraid of that. And then in terms of like focusing their attention somewhere else, like I said, they're growing, they're helping be more effective in their jobs. Don't be afraid of that kind of stuff. And if it's a problem, you deal with it on a performance level. You don't deal with it by banning people from having a life outside of work. That's just foolish. It's foolish, and it's hurting you. It's like sawing off your own leg and going, well, I'm afraid I might break it. So I thought maybe if I just sawed off my leg and replaced it with an artificial one, then I don't have to worry about breaking it because I can attach a titanium one. Yeah, that's really smooth logic. So anyway, there's that. So Louisa, good question. So can I give a good example of AI freeing up people to do more high value work? Yeah, people are fearful that no one can identify the high value work and what that looks like. So I'll give one example, but I do think this is very personal. And one of the things that is why I focus so much on AI effectiveness is that even if you are a leader of a team, you don't just want to go, I am going to define high value for all of you. Because the reality is every single person is unique. And so even if you have two people doing the exact same job, you may want them using AI to help with different things, depending on who they are, because maybe they have gaps in certain areas, or maybe they do the same job, but maybe where they struggle is slightly different. And so as an example of this, okay, I'll give you an example. When I was working with, it was a marketing team, and I also did something similar with a learning team, and they create a lot of content. All right, they create a lot of content, which is good, but inevitably, a lot of times, creative folks can spend a lot of time iterating on, really tight details. Some did. And now here's an example where there were two different people. One was really good at coming up with ideas, really bad at refining them, really bad at kind of connecting the dots and refining them down. And for that person, I said, let's work with them on effectiveness of how they can use AI to quickly take their really good ideas and refine it down. Okay. That was their strength. Their strength was they came up with brilliant ideas, but they couldn't connect the dots between things and they couldn't organize it. Well, AI is really good at letting them go. And so we worked with that person on how do you turn on voice mode and just talk with AI through what your head is going through your head, and then have it help you organize and refine your thoughts. Not hand it over, but just refine their thoughts for them. So because what would happen is the leader would go to the person after this person threw out a really great idea that was very hard to follow. And they would go, I like it. I'm not seeing it. And so one, it would disengage that person. And two, they would go back and they would spend countless hours trying to organize this. And it was not their strong suit. And so they would go through and they'd come back and they'd be like, is this more organized? And the leader would be like, no, like I still am not quite sure what you're thinking here. And AI was great for them to be able to do it. And this person, we worked with them on effectiveness of being able to explain to their leader, like explain to AI how their leader thought about things. And so it would help them organize in a way that clicked with the leader. The leader loved it. And this person was still doing the work they were doing, but they were much more effective at it. And they weren't frustrated and disengaged trying to organize things. Now, conversely, another person on this team, they were really bad at coming up with ideas, but boy, when they were good, they could really refine it. Now, one of the things that we did with this was we actually worked to connect those two people because their skill sets balanced each other out really well. And we didn't want them to become 100% reliant on AI. But the reality is people get busy. This idea that people can just sit there and be your think tank all the time is not great. But so this other person, they would struggle with ideas. They would be given a challenge and they would, waste endless time brainstorming and trying to come up with things, or just sitting there having writer's block or content block as they were creating things. AI for them became a great idea generation thing. They could put together, here's the challenge we're trying to solve. Here's what we're trying to do. Pitch me 10 ideas of things that might help connect the dots between this. And this person was really good at looking through ideas and going, no, not it. But what happened at first was when it came to effectiveness, they would just look at it and go, yes or no. And they didn't like the ideas. And so they went, see, AI is not terribly helpful for me. And so as we worked with this person on using AI effectively, it was like, well, communicate that. Tell AI what's wrong with what it threw back at you and let it give you another round of edits. And so again, AI helped this person from sitting at their desk, just going, I just have writer's block. And then they'd go, get distracted with something else or end up in conversations with people or just straight up disengaged and bored because they just didn't know what to do or they were frustrated. Now AI was able to work with them, in real time in a way. And again, the other big thing we worked on was we connected these two people. And by doing so, they actually were able to collaborate better. So I think that's the kind of examples. Now, granted, if you want to talk big enterprise examples, I'm happy to talk about some of those at some point in the future. But I think one of the biggest misses of companies right now is companies right now are spending way too much money and way too much time trying to find the thing or the things they can throw AI at that are going to just soar. And there are some, that you might, you do the surgical work. I have this thing called the Pathfinder Pulse Analysis, where I work with companies to kind of go through their biggest challenges and say, like, let's figure out which of these makes the most sense for AI. And that's important work. It's important work to do it. But if you're not careful with that, you can lift something in one area and have it blow up in another. So there's just risk to these big enterprise things. And that's where you see some of the adoption failure. What a lot of companies are not doing is saying, actually, we've got these brilliant people who we hired, who are all extremely capable, who all have gaps. And yet they all have all these great capabilities that we know we're not tapping into. If we could get them to know how to use AI effectively and actually be wise and discerning with how they used it and when they used it and how to use it to augment their, thinking, not replace it, and how to use it to, help them where they're weak and not lean on it where they're strong type of a thing, or make them even stronger. Like one really practical example of this is I have somebody that they were trying to figure out how to be more effective as a leader with their teams. And I said, well, start recording all the transcripts from your team meetings and your one-on-ones and put them in Notebook LM and ask Notebook LM to give you feedback on what you could be doing differently. And, it's going to know what you said and all this. And it did a really good job of helping them come through it. Now, I was very clear as I was coaching them, don't just take whatever it says. And we would talk through, what did it come up with? Why did, ask questions? Why did it say that? Do you agree? Like, well, try implementing them, see if there's a difference. But I think some of those things, if you actually as a company can work on improving the effectiveness of your employees using AI, my experience has been hands down, you see a much better lift than basically playing roulette with AI on the corporate table. And that's what I see a lot of companies right now. There's like, everything on 26 black. And it's like, oh, it didn't work. Everything on 73 red. And you're like, oh, it didn't work. And I'm like, you should be doing some of that, but you should be balancing that with how are we lifting up everybody in the organization to use AI effectively so that they're just streamlining and improving the day-to-day everything they're having to do. And honestly, almost every company I come talk to and I go, do you know how effective your people are at AI right now? It's just blank stares. Like, no, we don't even know how to measure it. And so I think that's an opportunity area for every company. Okay, I got to jump to a meeting here in 3 minutes, so I'm going to be really quick about this one. So the third topic I had was this whole statement by the CEO of Waymo on like society's ready for people to get killed by a Robotaxi. And then just today, I think I saw an article that a Robotaxi didn't kill a person, but it ran over like an animal. And let's just say people weren't ready for it to run over an animal. I don't think the statement that people are ready for it to run over people is an accurate statement at all. Now, I think what he's bringing up that I think the way he said it is wildly inappropriate. But I think what he's getting at is a lot of times we don't recognize the inherent risk of things we already do today. And I think his point that driving inherently is dangerous. People are getting hurt and killed in car accidents and all this other stuff right now. And so, yes, in theory, can autonomous vehicles potentially do a better job? Especially, I watched a whole article with my son last night about how all these screens in new cars is actually, it's terrifying. Go look at the data about deaths and injuries from car accidents. And we were doing really good. It was going down, and we like are spiking back up to record highs as everybody's distracted trying to find, like, how do I turn the blinkers on in this car? Or like, I can't seem to turn my brights off. I got to go through 32 settings to get to it, type of a thing. And it's a big problem. So because of that, I understand where he's coming from, saying autonomous vehicles could actually be safer than humans. I actually think he's not wrong in some of those statements. Where I think people are having a reaction to it, and I think this is where anybody who's doing anything with autonomous anything needs to think about this. Part of the reason people are freaking out about the idea of Waymo's running people over is we've got an accountability problem right now, a major accountability problem. When AI does something wrong, nobody takes responsibility for it. It's somebody else's fault. It's nobody's fault. It's AI's fault. You know, we can't really take like everybody runs for the hills in terms of responsibility and accountability. And so when people say, oh, people are ready for people to get run over by an autonomous vehicle, it's not necessarily that people can't wrap their heads around the fact that autonomous vehicles could be viable. It's the fact that they know accidents are going to happen, and people are rightfully concerned that when that happens, people are going to go, oh, well, hey, deaths happen too, so quit complaining. And real, genuine tragedies are going to be just, people are going to be gaslit for having concerns about it. And I agree with that. And so I actually think some of these things, when it comes to autonomous vehicles, autonomous work, we've got to close the accountability gap if we really actually want people to feel more comfortable with it. Because yes, AI and autonomous action can be really helpful. But if there's no accountability and people keep watching powerful people in powerful organizations, in some cases get away with murder, you can't blame them for being skeptical. And you can't just go, well, people die anyway, so if our AI kills people, what is your problem? That is the most narcissistic attitude to have about this stuff. And rightfully, that's why people are so upset, and why I disagree with the CEO of Waymo that people are just totally fine with, you know, people, animals, whatever, getting run over by AI vehicles. They're just not. And I actually think the bigger problem is the lack of accountability. And so if companies want to see us move more in that direction, we need to stop seeing what right now is being held up as good leadership, which is say one thing, then do the opposite. And if anybody points it out, you actually blame them for being nuts. You know, gaslighting is just the normal thing. You know, just straight up lying to people. Like we've got to get back to a state of integrity where people can actually trust that the people in charge will take responsibility for things. And if you have autonomous vehicles, if you're an autonomous vehicle company and your car hits somebody, you're going to do the right thing and make sure that that's taken care of, and take safety measures into account to do everything possible to reduce that risk. You got to build that trust. And that goes back to something I said before. Trust is a currency. And right now, the currency rate is in the toilet. And so we've got some really hard work to do to increase the trust, you know, rate if we actually want to move forward with some of this stuff. So I got to jump to another meeting because I'm already a couple minutes late, but this has been great. Thanks everybody for your questions. This has been super fun. I've enjoyed the conversation, and I hope you have a great weekend. Go trick-or-treating with kids or neighbors or whatever, or hand out candy, have some fun in community time, and we will see you next week. Have a great weekend.